Okay, 11.1 is here. The class meta for both Mythic Plus and Raiding has absolutely shifted, and with new changes coming quite often, knowing which classes is winning and losing is very key to stay ahead of everybody else. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down the biggest winner and loser classes as of right now in 11.1. Before we do, a quick word from our sponsor. Okay, if you're anything like me as a gamer, you're always looking for that epic immersive experience. Well, Atomfall is a single-player first-person survival game where you're dropped into a wasteland. Now, when I mean wasteland, I mean a 1960s England after a nuclear disaster. It's clear here that radiation isn't the only threat, though. It imagines an alternate history where the 1957 Windscale Pines nuclear accident spirals into something worse. You're trapped in a violent post-nuclear dystopia where there are cults, creatures, and desperate survivors are fighting for control. And staying alive means really doing whatever it takes. What I love about this game is that there's no quest marker to hold your hand. You're left to investigate, interrogate, and uncover the truth entirely on your own. Every encounter, every clue, and every decision matters, and the deeper you dig, the more unsettling things get. What really makes the game stand out to me is how you approach your survival, though. You're not just running from point A to B, it's how you handle every encounter. Do you sneak through the shadows, avoiding the conflict entirely, staying out of sight to conserve your resources, or do you go in there saying, screw it, guns blazing, taking everyone out in seconds, but risking your valuable ammo? You'll be facing off against bandits, cultists, creatures using a mix of melee combat, ranged weapons, and craftable gear, but every fight is a gamble, and sometimes you gotta know it might be better to just kick it off and run. In a world where danger lurks around every corner, survival isn't just about fighting. It's knowing when to make the right choices before it's too late. I gotta say, though, about this game, I really love the atmosphere, man. It's got that eerie Fallout vibe that I haven't played in a very long time, and it makes me want to explore every corner, even when I'm not so sure I should, because I'm scared as heck to do so. Listen, guys, if you've ever been interested in survival games, Atomfall just launched on March 27th on all platforms and day one on Xbox Game Pass. Check it out using the link in the description below, and this one's definitely worth it, so keep it on your radar. Thanks, Atomfall, for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back to the content now. Okay, welcome back. Starting off with by far one of the best caches in the game. Surprisingly, we do have Warlock. Now, Warlock throughout Season 1 struggled a lot, but man, in Season 2, they're performing amazing across the board right now. Affliction Warlock in particular has been dominating the raiding scene and higher-end Mythic Plus content pretty much all season, and that's due to their spread cleave and their damage profile with the Hellcaller hero talent tree is great. With this hero talent spec, you get a damage over time effect that hits like a truck, but when you apply it on an enemy, it literally never comes off. Now, because of how much spread damage there is in the raid, and of course in Mythic Plus content, you get a lot of value out of this spec, and Affliction ends up performing quite well. In my personal opinion, I still think Affliction feels very off, you know, spamming Malefic Rapture windows in some cases, but their damage profile is doing really great so far in Season 2. They got some nice buffs right before the big patch, and a couple other damage over time effects, and it really sent them far and beyond, you know, everyone's expectations, even including my own. In my personal opinion, though, I do think Demonology is the go-to spec for Mythic Plus content here. They got their 4-set where every time they cast Hand of Gul'dan, their active Dreadhounds do a big AoE bite and a cleave, and the damage is just so high and so consistent that they have really a perfect DPS profile for all forms of Mythic Plus. Not only that, though, the rotation doesn't really change from a single target to AoE standpoint, so it may take some time to get used to, you know, summoning all these pets and putting it into a big, you know, Demonic Tyrant window. But once you get it going, man, things feel great for Demonology Warlock, and it's a super fun rotation to get down. Now, surprisingly, Destruction Warlock isn't performing as well as everybody had hoped early on in the season, but that doesn't mean they're a bad spec or anything. They just aren't really keeping up with the other two Warlock specs. Either way, though, Destruction is a super fun DPS spec. You know, primarily, you play the Hellcaller hero talent tree where you cast that Cataclysm, you afflict everybody with Wither, and you're channeling Demon Fire, and then you just spam those Rain of Fire casts, and your AoE damage can be really nasty. Of course, we all know those Chaos Bolts can hit for millions of damage each time it's cast, so it's super fun overall. I will have to say, Warlock is absolutely a winner right now. This class has incredible defensives, good utility with Soulstones and Gateways, and overall a really good damage profile this season. Moving on to our next big winner, we actually have the Rogue. Now, surprisingly from a damage standpoint, Rogue across the board is doing really well right now. Starting off with Assassination, they personally have my vote for being the best rogue spec in the game. Their damage can get out of control at some points in AoE. You spread all your dots like Garrote, all your ruptures, and then you hit everything with Crimson Tempest, and then you're just hitting everyone in the area with the Caustic Splatter passive, and your damage is just nuts in the AoE department. I also particularly love that your Envenoms with your Deathstalker hero talent tree, dude, these things hit like a Mack truck due to you getting those automatic crits, and it feels super fun in single target scenarios. Not only that, they just got buffed just the other day with a little bit on their single target capabilities with, you know, their mutilate and ambush damage. So honestly, Assassination's in a really good spot. Sub Rogue, on the other hand, is a bit different. It's not about micro hits over time and applying dots. You get those ginormous burst windows with Shadow Dance, Symbols of Death, and those ever so satisfying secret tech windows. The burst potential on sub is easily among some of the highest in the game, so proper cooldown usage here is absolutely mandatory. And if you do it properly, the spec is actually really solid in rating and Mythic Plus right now. The only issue with sub is that it does require a group to be able to coordinate together, similar to like a Fire Mage or Frost Death Knight, because after you use your cooldowns, you could lose some DPS. Lastly, of course, we do have the Outlaw Rogue, and I do think this is the weaker spec of the three. There's a lot of RNG and chance involved in a lot of their gameplay. You got rolling the bones to get good rolls, flipping coins to hopefully get your combat buffs, hoping for your crack shot to give you combo points and reset the cooldown. There's just a lot of things that involve chance, and in my opinion, it drags the spec down significantly, and I'm hoping they can get a rework maybe heading into the new expansion. As of right now, though, their damage isn't awful, it's just very volatile, and it's either like, oh my god, you're pumping and you're annihilating the damage meters, or you just feel pretty terrible and you're doing less DPS than your tank. All in all, though, I will say that for a pure DPS class, Rogue is blasting right now. I do think all three specs are viable in all forms of content, so there's no way you can't have them as a winner on this list. Now, moving on to our next winner, we can't continue talking without the Judgment-Seeking Paladin. You gotta know, all three specs are super fun, they're very straightforward, and they're very unique when it comes to playing them. Now, Retribution Paladin is the first one that comes to mind that fits all of this agenda because they're performing great right now. Every 30 seconds or so, you have the nuclear burst windows with their Wake of Ashes, Hammer of Light combo, and then you have their very consistent AoE damage with the Blade of Justice, their Consecrate, AoE Judgment, Divine Storm, and on top of that, don't forget that they do have the most utility probably in the game. You have great off heals, bubbles, absorbs, lay on hands, you name it. The Paladin class as a whole brings it, and it's what makes them so valuable and strong overall this season. I think Retribution Paladin is amongst some of the easiest DPS specs you could play in the game, and if you do your rotation properly, there's no way you can't top the damage meters. When it comes to tanking, you do have Protection Paladin, and in my opinion, they're my favorite tank to have in my group in the entire game. They deal nuclear AoE damage when they pop their cooldowns. They have fantastic sustain and defense cooldown capabilities, amazing utility for the group, and they're quite mobile with Divine Steed and Hand of Freedom. I love playing Prop Paladin in Mythic Plus and just gathering all these mobs together, popping my bubble and taunting so I take no damage and I could just do my damage profile, and it feels really good for a good 10 seconds or so. Protection Paladin is fantastic. They dominated all of Season 1 and they continue to do so throughout Season 2. Now, talking about Holy Paladin though, I will admit this spec has been struggling a bit in Season 2. However, they did recently just get some buffs, and I think it put them over that, hump to make them quite viable and amongst some of the better healers in the game. Don't get me wrong, I don't think they're as strong as Restoration Druid or Discipline Priest, but they definitely have their own usage and niches to where they're playable. One thing is absolutely known, if you need on-demand healing, you pop that Avenging Wrath right now and everything around you is just instant healed to full health. You pop your wings, you got the lasers going out constantly, and if you combine that with the Holy Prism and those massive single target heals coming from Eternal Flame, man, things feel very, very good on a healing standpoint. I do think Holy Paladin needs a bit of a better damage profile though, because spamming Shield of Righteousness and Holy Shock, it doesn't feel great coming from them, and it feels more like a Protection Paladin thing when you're hitting people with shields, but overall, their healing is starting to feel very good coming out of the Herald of the Sun hero talent tree, combined with all these new buffs. I gotta say though, I love where Paladin as a class is as a whole. All three specs are absolutely viable and playable in all forms of content at any level. All three specs, straightforward and super fun to play, making them a winner in my book. Next up on our biggest winners, we gotta talk about the Demon Hunter, because overall, the class is doing great right now. I will be honest, there are only 2 specs, so it's not that difficult for them to be great as a whole, but it's still an awesome class nonetheless. Havoc Demon Hunter in particular right now has been getting constant updates and changes, and their Eldrazi hero talent tree is doing fantastic compared to Season 1. They got high damage cleave profile with all their abilities like I-Beam, Blade Dance, Throw Glaive. Their damage output is amongst some of the best in the game. Demon Hunter as a whole, they bring their Chaos brand for that 3% extra damage to your casters, and all this is wrapped up into a nice little gift basket of a spec that isn't too complicated to play. So overall, when it comes to Havoc Demon Hunter, you're hitting harder than ever, it's less complicated than it used to be, and they have a variety of builds that feel really good. So what isn't there to like about this spec? I really love lining up all those big Blade Dance combo windows where you get that inertia going, you get into Metamorphosis, and you get that extra 6/ Blade Dance, and it's really, really satisfying. On top of that, of course, Vengeance Demon Hunter is amongst one of the best tanks in the game. They saw some updates with their Demon Spike ability, other abilities like Cycle of Binding and Feed the Demon got updated on their talent trees, and there's a nice amount of build variety when it comes to all their capstones, which makes it super fun to play as well. Of course, like we spoke about, Eldrazi Reaver got some nice buffs, which is great for them, and overall, Vengeance Demon Hunter can pull some insane DPS numbers right now, sometimes being compared to some of the other DPS classes in the game, which is hilarious. I love the fact that Vengeance Demon Hunter, they have a very solid self-sustained toolkit, good crowd control, and it gives them the potential to be able to carry lower end keys pretty much entirely on your own. So Demon Hunter, in my opinion, is absolutely a winner right now, and it looks to stay that way moving forward. Moving on next, boy oh boy, we have a surprise because we're talking about the Priest. Now here's the thing, Priest is always quite wishy-washy at times in terms of a class overall, but at this point in the game, they're doing great. I'm really loving Shadow Priest right now. They're a very powerful DPS spec individually, and they've always had issues where if Discipline Priest is meta, they kind of struggle and have trouble getting into that smaller group content. But at the moment, man, Shadow Priest can deal some incredible damage right now while also bringing some solid utility. They bring Power Infusion to your top DPS. They bring Mass Dispel, Power Word Fortitude. So tying all this together with the fact that they're a great DPS spec individually, it's a very nice 1-2 punch combo. They have great build variety when it comes to their hero talent trees, and depending on the type of content you're in, so there's some flexibility there as well. The Void Weaver hero talent tree for me is definitely the go-to choice. I love those big chunky damage windows with those Mind Blast, easy AoE DPS being tied to Psychic Link. I mean, Shadow Priest is in a great spot right now. With Discipline Priest, of course, everyone knows that they're doing great. I was hoping personally to see the Oracle hero talent tree potentially step up and become meta, but I think they're going to still need some updates because Void Weaver is just dominating. The consistency out of this spec when it comes to DPS as well as healing is just so strong right now, and it really is excelling this season. With Discipline Priest, you bring a ton of damage reduction tools for your group like Power Word Barrier, Pain Suppression, all the absorbs to mitigate heavy incoming damage. And if you know what you're doing on Priest, you can really take advantage of something like this when damage is about to come in. For utility, of course, they also bring their Mind Soothe, Mass Dispel, and you gotta know Discipline Priest is probably the best overall healing spec in Mythic Plus because they bring so much damage and such high healing capabilities. To put it straightforward, their numbers are just above the rest in terms of healing and DPS, and as a 1-2 punch combo, there's no better spec. When it comes to Holy Priest, though, they're kind of in an okay spot right now. They started really strong in the War Within, but over time, they've kind of fallen behind some of the top healers like Resto Druid and Disc Priest. In 11.1, they got some decent changes, like a major focus being on those, Apotheosis uptime, and they have a new Cheat Death talent, which is great, and it definitely helps them, but even with all these buffs, they're kind of just middle of the pack in terms of healing. They don't pump out damage really that much, or utility like some of the other specs in the game, but I will say that their flexibility and solid raid cooldowns do mean that they can find a spot in a raid if you use them properly. All in all, though, when it comes to Priest, typically they have a healer spec that is meta, and we're kind of just fishing on whether if Shadow Priest is doing great or not, and at this point, they are. So typically that means Priest is in a really good spot, making them a big winner so far in Season 2. Okay, now moving on to some of the bigger, quote, losers. Now, try to take this with a grain of salt. Don't get offended here. The only reason these guys are labeled, quote, losers is because the spot they're currently in is kind of subpar with the majority of their specs. And even after the recent changes, they're not really doing much. Moving on with a very big surprise, which I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for, is actually the Mage. The thing is I actually don't think Mage is a horrible class from a design standpoint. I think all three specs are designed pretty well when it comes to their hero talent trees and gameplay for their rotation. The main issue I have with this class is with Frost and Arcane. Starting off with Arcane, though, their damage profile right now just doesn't really fit the raid. And when it comes to Mythic Plus, they have zero build variety at all. Imagine this. Imagine if you can only play one viable build for Mythic Plus and Raid, one hero talent tree that was effective, and all of it meant that you dealt pretty average to subpar damage. Yeah, that's not really a good thing when you're trying to pick a spec to play this season. The crazy thing is, I think Arcane is actually a lot of fun. I like trying to get proper usage out of the Nether Precision talent. Using all their cooldowns is fun in those big nuclear explosive burst windows. But one of my biggest issues is that they have almost zero build variety, and they easily have one of the worst tier set bonuses in the game. With their tier set, you simply just get clear casting occasionally, AoE arcane missiles. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't feel awful rotationally, but it just feels so unrewarding to perform well on this spec compared to some of the other classes in the game. Their tier set is boring, their damage numbers feel low, and it's not looking good so far. When it comes to Frost Mage, once again, I think they're in a similar spot to Arcane. I think the rotation is a good amount of fun. They have a ton of AoE damage to be thrown out at enemies, and they perform pretty well in Mythic Plus. They have tons of frozen orbs, AoE ice lances, blizzards, constant slows, and roots. They're a fun spec. The problem is that it requires your tank to remain stationary and keep all the enemies perfectly grouped up, and that's just something that's not typically going to happen in Mythic Plus, and it's definitely not going to happen in a raid. For raiding, they have an awful cleave profile with a major lack of build variety, and overall, Frost is just getting their ass whooped in the raiding environment. The only saving grace of Mage right now is, of course, Fire Mage. I do think that Fire Mage struggles in lower Mythic Plus content because everything dies too fast to get, proper cooldown usage of your combustion. But man, if you're in a good group and you're pushing those higher keys where you're with a solid team and everything gets grouped up properly, you can easily push 10, 15, 20 million DPS and be locked and loaded just to destroy everything in the area. Fire Mage overall is doing great in both raiding and Mythic Plus, but I do think two of their specs isn't doing that well right now. And listen, if a majority of your specs aren't doing great, you are technically just a loser so far this season. Additionally, when it comes to another, quote, loser, sadly, we gotta talk about the Evoker, man. The main headline of this entire story has to go to Augmentation. Augmentation took some very hard nerfs right before the launch of Season 2, and personally, I thought it wasn't going to affect them that much, but man, they have fallen far from grace. Blizzard recently tried to update their damage profile by like 15%, but even then, they're still dead last in terms of damage for both Mythic Plus and raiding, and it leaves this class in a really weird limbo state. They're not good enough to be a full-on support, and they don't deal enough damage to be full-on DPS. And the thing is I don't even think Blizzard knows what to do with them right now. I think the gameplay loop, personally, is pretty fun. I like playing Augmentation. They just got gutted so hard recently with all these nerfs that the numbers just simply put are not there. When it comes to Preservation though, I actually think their healing numbers are actually insane and amongst some of the best in the game if you know what you're doing, because Preservation started the expansion very strong. They dominated early healing and they have very easy builds to play with their Flame Shaper hero talent tree that felt great. Through time though, as we headed into Season 2, they're falling behind. Once again, their healing is still very high on. They could pump out insane numbers, but they fall behind some of the other ramp healers this tier. I think they bring great utility like Zephyr, Time Spiral, Rescue, but overall, their biggest problem, in my opinion, is that their damage is absolutely garbage compared to some of the other healers in the game. Like, if you look at these numbers right now on screen, it's not even close, and I think that's a major issue for them right now. The saving grace for this class, surprisingly, I think for the first time ever, has got to be about Devastation. Devastation is popping off right now. They have a ton of build variety because both Flame Shaper and Scale Commander are performing very well in both Mythic Plus and raiding. They're a very straightforward spec and they bring fantastic utility, loads of crowd control, dispels, and overall they're just a very fun, explosively bursty DPS spec that anyone would enjoy right now in the War Within. Listen, if 2 out of 3 of your specs once again are struggling, you're kind of in a bad spot at the moment, and that makes Evoker overall a loser. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up today's video. If you guys are interested in checking out some live discussions and talks, check out the podcast on stream. I promise you guys won't be disappointed. Additionally, if you're looking for a guild, pay attention because we got a message for you. One last note we wanted to make. If you're looking for a guild or people to progress through Mythic Plus with or raid with next season, the Comeback Kids are recruiting, and any and all players are welcome to come on down, play with us. We're looking to fill out some new members for the raid. Oh my god, we fucking did it. Oh my god, let's fucking go, bro. Let's fucking go. That's how that shit gets done. If you're on the Horde, you can simply just go to the guild tab and search up the Comeback Kids, and we should pop up. Make sure you do have the guild size on any so you can actually see us. Either way though, if it doesn't work, you just use the Discord link in the comment section below. Hop in there and verify, get yourself in, and then we can get you invited by you posting your name and server under the guild invite tab.